As time goes on, we're obviously getting farther away from the text, right? In one sense, of course. But in another sense, as time goes on, we're not necessarily getting farther from the original text. We're actually getting closer. What do I mean by that? Well, let me pick on the King James Bible for a second. The beloved King James Bible was translated between the years of 1604 and 1611. And it was translated not from manuscripts, those handwritten copies, but from printed editions of the Hebrew Old and Greek New Testaments. And the main printed editions that the King James translators use of the New Testament, the King James translators had 7 printed editions of the Greek New Testament, and those were based on approximately 31 manuscripts. Now, we have today 27 of those 31 manuscripts in our possession. We can go and we can look at them. But we also have 5,000 plus more manuscripts. If you skip ahead to 2023 from 1611 when the King James translation was published, we have a greater body of evidence that leads us back to the New Testament text and the Old Testament text. Today, we have copies that go back to the 2nd century. So as time goes on, as we stick shovels in the ground and we discover manuscripts and we uncover archaeological evidence, we get closer to the time frame to a picture of what the Bible actually said. Now, that doesn't mean that the King James translation is not accurate. If anything, what we found when we unearthed all those manuscripts is a confirmation that even though the King James translators were using a base text that came from a later period, it was remarkably similar. This is not a dig on the King James Bible, but what we have when we have modern translations is we're able to get a greater picture of what the original looked like. And all of those manuscripts, the oldest copies, ones that come from the 2nd, the 3rd, the 4th centuries, they've been discovered within the last 200 years. And this is one of the things that my colleague and I, Andy, went over to Egypt and are going to be producing that Can I Trust the Bible video series, talked about. We went to some of the places that those manuscripts were found. We went to places like Oxyrhynchus, Egypt. The manuscript that's on the screen is called P66. Now, scholars are very imaginative. They said, what's it made out of? Papyrus. P. And how many do we have before this? 65. P66. Haha, write it down in Latin, because that sounds better. And now they have P66. Now, this is a very important manuscript because if you think about a book, Christians didn't invent the book, but they popularized it. The ancient world loved scrolls. Christians loved codexes, books. Remember I said about Latin and academics? Codex means book in Latin, so an academic is going to call a book a codex. And so if you think about a book, the most vulnerable areas of the book are the front and the back. And we have a lot of middle of the books. And so if we're talking about, say, the Gospel of John, we lose a lot of the beginning and we lose a lot of the end. P66 is an almost entirely complete copy of the Gospel of John. And it comes from the late 2nd or early 3rd century. And if you read along with me on the screen, you can see, anybody going to start? No? I'll make it easy for you. If you read along with me on the screen, it says, not yet? It says at what we would consider John chapter 1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. Does that sound familiar? I wonder why. It's because that's exactly what it says in your copy of the Gospel of John.